So the first question, I bet it must be a really exciting time as soon gamers around the world will be able to play Cyberpunk 2077, but what is your first impression of the game? I know it's a risky topic and you are not really impartial to it, but what can you say?
Actually, the interesting part is I have not seen the game in total, and I'll explain to you why. When you're in game development, and this has been for every project I've ever been on, you see parts as they come in, and you assemble the game in your head as well, and then you see bigger parts as more things get assembled, and then you see really big parts. So at this point, I know it plays well. I like what I'm seeing visually. I love what we're doing in terms of meshing the gameplay with the storyline. And, since I know the whole storyline, that's made it a lot easier. So I think it looks great right now. I will be fascinated to see it in total. And, were I able to travel out of the States and go over to Poland, I probably would have seen what's currently going to gold right now. But, well, COVID, as we say around here. So it looks great from what I'm seeing. And you have to understand, part of it is, we've seen a lot of people attempt this project. We've even attempted it at least once with the Singapore group. And it's a pretty huge project to take on. So I like what I'm seeing.
Great. I like what I'm seeing as well, and I can't wait to play the game, honestly speaking. And the tagline of original tabletop game that you created is the role-playing game of the dark future. And I've been wondering if that's the basic rule of the genre, that, the future has to be dark.
Yeah, I think it does. I'll tell you a story that kind of underscores it. We did a more transhumanist version. We call Cyberpunk V3. Back in around the early 2000s, and it didn't sell very well at all. But I had a conversation shortly after that with my son, and he's his mid-20s now. And at the time he said, but the thing is, it's like, the cool jackets and the weapons and the mean streets and a whole bit like that fit better than a future that might be possibly good. And I think what that does is it both relates to people who feel that the super optimistic, Gernsback continuum, optimistic spaceships, rockets, radioactivity as your friend, they feel less like they're being told a fairy tale and they're being told something that's closer to what they see in their everyday. So I think it's kind of built into Cyberpunk that it does have a fairly dark future. And the hope you get out of it comes from what your actions are in that dark future.
And in 1988, when the first edition came out, Cyberpunk had already been an established genre. And I would love to learn about the biggest challenges of exploring its characteristic themes in a tabletop game.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting because I originally didn't set out to do a Cyberpunk game. I set out to do a Blade Runner game. It's my favorite movie. I have so many up on the shelf over there. I have so many different versions of Blade Runner, occasionally have Blade Runner nights where we just sit around and, watch it, and I drink out of my Blade Runner tumblers and all that. But basically, that was my original goal. And then while I was working on it, I heard about Cyberpunk, but I didn't know much about it. And one of the friends of mine I have in the business, a guy named Rob Pruden, happened to mention that he had a Cyberpunk author in his group of players. And basically it was fascinating because I said, okay, so what do you write? And he said, we wrote this book called Hardwired. And I said, okay, I'll go get it, So I go out and I get Hardwired and I go, damn, this is great. It's like Blade Runner, but it's like mobile, it's moving, and the protagonists are less kind of run down and, gentlemen losers. They're more, active characters. They're not heroes exactly. They're not superhuman, but they have greater agency. And so I went back and said, okay, I've decided I'm going to do a Cyberpunk game. And I basically took it out to several friends of mine and said, oh, here's kind of what I want to do. And they gave me advice. And I went ahead and started running what would eventually be what we call 2013, the first Cyberpunk edition. And we were still kind of winging it on a lot of things. And before I finished it, I finally got turned on to William Gibson. And I said, you know, my God, how did I miss this guy? His stuff is so good. I said to my wife that night as I'm thinking, reading it in bed, like, I'm going, this guy's so good. He makes my teeth hurt. But we'd already kind of set the direction of how we were going to do everything. And we kind of just kept moving. And as a result, a lot of things are kind of they're a little asynchronous traditional cyberpunk, because we were more influenced by things like Hardwired and more, you know, classic high-speed science fiction.
Actually, many people I know that they are surprised that that it wasn't until much later that you actually read William Gibson's Neuromancer, because many assume that was your main source of inspiration. So that's kind of funny.
That was the weird part. I think I would have come up with a different game. I really do. And the thing is, like I said, you know, Walt's a friend of mine, and I often said, you're to blame for me doing it like this, because the thing with Gibson is that it is much more like Blade Runner, in that the characters do the caper, but they don't come out of it victorious. They get kind of that little piece that they need, and then, you know, Case gets back his nerves, you know, that sort of thing. But I was at that point really tied to that kinetic energy. And then after that, I read Voice of the Whirlwind, which is another book Walter wrote, and I went, okay, this is the kind of style I want. This is the feel. And for a lot of years, it was, you know, until I think The Long Run came out, which was a sci-fi book about 7 years later, I didn't encounter that very much. That kind of, you know, the hero is an active, high agency character. But, you know, it was kind of weird, because by that point, what we were doing was kind of our own version of cyberpunk. And then we started doing what we call the Cyberpunk Masters series, which is we would find writers like Walter or Alec Effinger, for example. George Alec Effinger did When Gravity Fails with us. And, you know, we try to fit their worlds in, because by that point we knew there was this genre out there, and we were only touching like one little corner of it. We kind of wanted to, you know, basically have some kind of real true connection, how those people, you know, tell us how to accurately voice their worlds.
And what about your cinematic inspirations or points of references? Obviously, you mentioned Blade Runner, and very, very often in the cinema, that's my impression, that cyberpunk genre is very close to noir, crime noir.
It is, and I love noir. It actually, you know, I would say in some large elements, it is very much Maltese Falcon, Chinatown. Because if you think about it, you know, even if you didn't have the voiceover, Blade Runner would be a film noir film. It's just film noir in this really weird future. You know, and it's still Los Angeles, you know. So the upshot is other things that would have kind of tied into this. One of them is the movie Hackers, weirdly enough. Hackers is a real product of the 80s. But what I love about it is the people involved, the characters involved, again, have a great deal of agency, and they're up against not just, you know, political forces, the government, but they're also up against people who have betrayed the ideals of, you know, free hacking, of free, you know, information. So it has a sort of really cool rebellion thing going on. And besides which, in that one, I fell in love with Angelina Jolie at that moment, but, you know, everybody did. So then the other one I would say, weirdly enough, is Streets of Fire. Streets of Fire is like the quintessential Solo comes back from the war, and his rocker girl or rocker boy girlfriend is caught up with a bunch of gangers, and there's people around, and there's people who have, you know, information, and there's fixers, and there's, you know, the rainy streets and a little less neon. But it's still pretty film noir in its feel. And I would have to say that had a really big effect on me, because from there, a lot of what Fixers and Rocker Boys and even Nomads came out of. The fact that the hero walks in, he's got a long gun over his shoulder and a duster. And I said, yep, that's a Nomad. That works, you know. And of course, there's, you know, classics like Mad Max and so forth like that as well.
And at that time, did you even expect that Cyberpunk game would make such a splash and evolve into a global franchise and a household name it is now?
I always hoped, but no, and I'll be really honest, I don't think anybody's CD either. You know, I mean, this is insane. And, you know, I think the other day, you know, because we have a morning meeting in our company and people bring in stuff. Somebody came in the other day and said, there's an entire London bus that's got the whole 2077, you know, loading screen, et cetera, on the side of the bus. And we went, oh, you know, and that day I had gotten a whole bunch of stuff in, including, where the heck did it go to? Missing it. At any rate, I ended up with a trauma team masks because we have, you know, this COVID thing going on over here. I had trauma team masks. I'm going, no one even knows what that logo means. And all of a sudden everyone knows what that logo means. I knew that people would enjoy it, but I think we hit the right time. You know, it was a world that is close enough to what's going on in 77 and in Red and in 2020, you know, so people can recognize. And yet it gives them some way to feel like they can control that world. That world is not rolling over them and, you know, taking their stuff and saying, hey, thanks for your lunch money and leaving. There's a sense of control that I think people like about it. I can be a badass in a bad situation. You know, I don't have to worry about the, you know, the gangers, you know, rolling me for my lunch money if I'm as bad as they are. And I'm a good ganger, you know. But yeah, I would say, frankly, I don't think any of us expected the fan reaction that we got. You know, we aim to get a good game. We did not expect, you know, I look around and I see people cosplaying, you know, characters like Johnny, and I go, never in a million years I imagined someone would be cosplaying Johnny Silverhand. Heck, the idea that I would have gotten Keanu Reeves to be playing Johnny Silverhand is already insane. You know, so at this point, I'm just kind of like, let's see where this happens. You know, see what goes. Because there's no way to know.
So can I assume that Keanu Reeves would be your first choice for Johnny Silverhand as well?
Actually, back in the day, I would have gotten David Bowie myself.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's a little hard now. The trick to doing Johnny, though, is that Johnny is he's a weird combination of very, very internal. Everything's bottled up and it's just kept controlled. And then he's outwardly extraordinarily charismatic. So you have to have a character that, you know, people like immediately look at, you know, and go, whoa, I'd like to be like him, or I'd like to be with him. But at the same time, you don't really know what's going on behind his eyes. And what I find interesting about Keanu Reeves is most of what he shows is in how he acts, movements and so forth, than it is in what he says. So, you know, it was my reaction when I first found out was, oh, I didn't think we'd ever get anybody like that, you know. Then we went in to see him, and they had already filmed a bunch of his acting stuff. And I went, yeah, he fits. He's got, you know, he's a little more, a little more out there, more edgy verbally than Johnny would be normally. But I ended Johnny's story at his death at that point. And if Johnny kept going, that was going to be one. He was already an incredibly angry person. He'd seen the world just being horrible. So this is a man who's got a lot bottled up, and it needs to kind of explode out. You know, it can't be held back anymore. It's got to explode. And I went, you know, Reeves is perfect. It works. He's just controlled enough that you think any minute now, yeah, Johnny can be a real nice guy and he can be an incredible son of a bitch. You know? It just depends on what side you're on. And as I also say, don't ever date Johnny, because Johnny is really terrible on his girlfriends.
And can you recall how CDPR people approached you and when you first learned that they want to make a video game out of Cyberpunk?
We get a call out of left field from Michał Nowakowski, who at that point was the business manager. And Michał said, basically, we'd like to do Cyberpunk. And we went, you sure you got the right Cyberpunk? And he went, yeah, we played it when we were, back in college, in high school. And I went, oh, so you were the five guys, right? Well, it turned out that they asked me to come out. And before they did, they sent me a copy of what at that point was Witcher 2. And my son and I booted up Witcher 2, and we're going through and going, this is really pretty damn good, And you have to remember, I was working in the video game industry. So I knew what was good, as opposed to, ooh, man. It was more like, okay, they did this, and they aliased this, went through the whole thing. So they invite me over, and I go, okay, so I'll go over, but it's probably going to be like 6 guys. I used to say 5 guys and a goat working in some, tiny hole in the wall with a bunch of Apple IIes. But at any rate, I was used to, in my job at Microsoft, running across, small studios that were real a hole in the wall. And I walk in and see these like, whoa, it's light, it's airy, there's lots of people, and their skills are maximum. They're really good at what they're doing. And they said, and wait, we have a new engine we're doing now, the new Red engine. That's even better, and I'm going, oh, they're going to beat that engine? Whoa, okay, that's going to be good. So my main thing was at first was I just didn't take them seriously until I saw what they could do. But after that, it was like, okay, they think like we do. They really want to do the best possible game. They're driven by that. Their company culture is a lot like ours. And I said, yeah, it's a pretty good match, actually. And they didn't want to do a Cyberpunk game. They wanted to do our Cyberpunk game. The first meeting was like, yes, we have to have Art Cunningham in and Johnny Silverhand and these people, and we'll have to do this, and maybe we can do these. And they're going through all these characters. And so when I finally saw the first trailer, the Cyber Psycho Girl, I remember looking around, not at the Cyber Psycho Girl in the immediate scene, but what they had done in the background. And what I saw was details that you could only get if you'd really read the books. If you'd gotten into the game, you'd look over and you go, oh, that logo is from such and such. Oh yeah, that the best part was they had a lighted hollow sign in one window in the background that was Alt Cunningham. And I went, yeah, so they got that, all those jokes. So I was impressed. And, we went ahead and signed paper and started working together.
I would obviously love to talk more about your involvement in the game, as you are credited as a consultant, but what does that exactly mean?
I am the guy that you go to when you want to know whether something you're doing fits the game, fits the world, fits the canon. Basically, I think I moved up to that point from being a mere licensor during one of the trips over, where Adam Badinsky basically dragged me in front of the entire darn studio and said, okay, explain this, because, we have people who didn't grow up in that period, who didn't, they weren't the 5 guys who played Cyberpunk. And so I started explaining to everybody. And when everybody filed out, they kind of went, oh yeah, we get it now. Yeah, that's really cool. And I went, oh, good. So that worked. And Adam said, yes, can you get on a train and go over to our other studio? And I went, what? Yeah, okay, sure. So I did the same thing to the other studios. And the point was I helped people fix on what the world worked like. And then as things progress, I talked to the story team, for example. So I would look at, the story and go, okay, well, that's, you're saving the world here. We don't save the world in Cyberpunk games. You do something that's personal instead. Or you've got silver guns that don't look like, big, ugly, dangerous weapons. They look like ray guns. No, nobody does that in Cyberpunk. Yes, believe it or not, people wear lighted collars in the dark future. Why? Because people seem to love that. I basically, I'm there to kind of answer questions, occasionally throw in gameplay suggestions. I know that when Adam came over at one point early on in the process, and he and I spent, I think, about a week, maybe 2. But anyway, we spent a long time locked in Talsorian. and going over with both whiteboards, like what should be happening? How would we do gameplay for this? What were the models, that worked? And, I sent them a whole bunch of other stuff later. And I think that helped because, I knew, for example, how to set up a design document to say, okay, maybe we should do this, this, and this. And so it moved to be more of a collaborative process. And, it worked for me because, I like working with those guys. They're all fun. A lot of fun guys there.
So can I say that some mechanics from the tabletop game that you had worked out were actually used in the video game and so forth?
Oh, yeah. The thing about it is, you work in tabletop and then you work in video games and work in tabletop again. And you get familiar with what doesn't translate really well. And after a while, you start saying, not, well, I've got to make it like this because it's in my game. You go, well, would that really work? Maybe I need to back off on that. Maybe, I should go from another angle because it's going to make a terrible video game. And I think that's something a lot of creators miss is they don't look at the platform and the strengths or weaknesses of the platform. They look instead at the canon and how accurate we are to the world. But these guys have pretty much nailed that, So I'm not too worried about that. What I am interested in is, can you play it? Is it fun to play? Is it, I hand them credit because they made the corporate role look really cool. I like the corporate role, but most people kind of go, yeah, I work for a corporation. What can it? Well, I'm thinking corporations like RoboCop, right? Where it's like they meet in the executive washroom and they're washing up, and then somebody pulls a gun out and shoots somebody. I'm promoting you now, bam, But they managed to get that and they capture that feeling. So overall, we've been able to make more than just the world fit, but to make the mechanics fit the world, which I'm really pleased with. And it also made us look again when we started Cyberpunk Red at the idea of making our stuff a little more streamlined as well. So Red is a lot easier to get into and play than the original 2020.
That's actually what I wanted to ask about next, about Cyberpunk Red. How was it for you to come back to the world after you created, after, I don't know, like 15 years, I think, since Cyberpunk version 3.0?
I never entirely give up a world. I'm always puttering with it. And I was actually puttering on Red when the CDPR guys contacted us. And oddly enough, it was called Red at that point and had nothing with CD PROJEKT RED. And coming back was interesting from a couple of reasons. One, we had to reconstitute the company again because I had been in video games and Lisa had been doing other things. And, basically, while our old crew dropped in, we weren't doing it 24/7 anymore. And so we had to get new teams in, which we've been doing. And the new crew is just amazing. They could do all kinds of insane things. And then we had, as the company grew, we ended up with a real family business in that my son became a designer. And he eventually pitched and got the pitch for the Witcher tabletop, which over here in the States is extremely successful, and I kind of looked at it and said, when did that kid learn how to do that? And he said, I've been watching you my entire life. And I'm like, oh, really? Okay. And it didn't scare you away. No, it didn't. So we had a lot of talented people and they were all just gung-ho to go do this again. And the CDPR guys were doing really neat things. And I realized at some point that there was this entire gap between 2077 and 2023, which had not been covered. And I've been thinking about setting things a little bit further down the timeline. So I went, yeah, okay, I'm going to do, 2020, I say 2045 now, finally landed on. And kind of the deal is we do everything up to the 2060s and they do everything from the 60s onward. And I like to joke, it's role-play game designing by Doctor Who, because I have a part of the timeline. And like last week, somebody said, yeah, we want to put this in, can you set it up so that, this is starting here? I'm going, yeah, well, I want to have this character like, there's going to be stuff all through 77 where if you know Red, by that point, you'll go, oh, no, they didn't do that, man. Did they? Oh, that was great. Or the other way around, they'll go, that guy's still around? Wait a minute, or, where did this come from? Oh, wait, it's over in Red. So that's one of the cool parts about keeping the timelines congruent, is that we have 45 books to draw on, So that's really a good thing.
So what's next for the whole franchise? I mean, we have now Cyberpunk comics, Cyberpunk games, obviously, Cyberpunk anime series, even Cyberpunk clothes. So is there anything else to conquer?
God. Well, I'm going to keep doing Cyberpunk, and I assume that my partners over at CD will keep doing Cyberpunk. We had a joke when we first were working all the contracts out. We had to get trademarks on things. And, Lisa's going through the lawyers and she's looking at the numbers. She gets down to category XYZ something, party hats. And she goes, Cyberpunk party hats. And I'm going, just side hats, the lawyers said we should do this. And I'm thinking, I can't even imagine Cyberpunk party hats. Now I can imagine Cyberpunk party hats because, I've got Cyberpunk mask. I've got a Cyberpunk laptop cover over there. We have a little shrine where we put up all the weird stuff we can get because we're just at this point amazed at it. I'm waiting now that we have all those really cool cars. I want Hot Wheels. I want Cyberpunk 2077 Hot Wheels. If you're listening, Mattel.
And what's next for the genre itself? I mean, we have not reached the technological peak it promised and threatened us with. So how can today's artists use present scientific developments to create even more advanced cyberpunk worlds?
I don't know that we haven't in a lot of ways. Okay, cell phones do many of the same sorts of things, if not more, than we had, in classic cyberpunk. What I see is, for example, cybernetics are being home built now. Prostheses are being home built and improved. We have, at this point, biological control on those systems. We have biological control on tons and tons of things. We have, once you have that, you have the beginning of something that would be net running. But, when I wrote that stuff, we did not have the internet we have now. And the internet we have now will probably expand a bit further. I think we are building it, but when you're in it, it's not as fun. In the States, we still have, people randomly going ape and shooting at each other, and I personally don't really need to live in a world like that. I mean, I just don't feel like going and yanking the long guns out of the closet to go down to the store. But, basically, I think what's happening is people are using cyberpunk as a model for how to cope and what they'll do if it gets even more cyberpunk. We have ecological screw-ups. We have, massive corporations doing nasty things. We have, really corrupt political systems. We have, people in the streets fighting and rioting. We have all of the stuff that is around in cyberpunk. And so far, the only thing I haven't seen personally is flying cars. Although I gather the Israelis now have something that to me looks so much like an AV4 that I swear to God, I'm going to get one and paint it red. But we're kind of getting there. We're kind of getting to that cyberpunk future. And as I've been quoted as saying, it's not an aspiration, it's a warning. We're not supposed to be doing this. We're supposed to be getting our act together and not living in a place where, acid rain falls down and dissolves your clothing, where, you can't breathe the air when, there's plays running around. We're not supposed to be doing this, people, and part of it is, my mother is not Roy Batty. Roy Batty can live in this world. My mother, I don't think my mother would have been really happy being a replicant,
Mike, thank you very much for your time. I can't wait to play the game. And it was honor and pleasure to speak to you.